60% of penalties are awarded to a team in the opposition half. And the most common option now in competitions with a bonus point system encouraging the scoring of tries is a kick to the corner with the aim of scoring with a rolling maul. Provided they are well organised and well coached and the referee only watches the opposition for infringements, most of the time they will score a try directly or be awarded another penalty from which most of the time they will try the same thing again.
Brumbies. They rumble. The crowd roars. And here we go. A massive surge by the home team. Over the line they go. It is a try. That's pretty to watch if you're a forward.
Pretty to watch if you're a forward. Because of the way rolling mauls are structured, should a try be scored, it's most often by the hooker. Now, I've mentioned this earlier on, but in 2019 Rugby World Cup, and I'll mention it again, the hooker scored 2.5 times more tries than a centre. In the first Rugby World Cup, the centre scored 1.7, nearly 2 times more tries than the hooker. A reminder of the law. The purpose of a maul is to allow players to compete for the ball, which is held off the ground. Now rugby laws should be about fairness. Laws pertaining to the rolling maul simply are not, at least not in the way they are being applied by the majority of referees. A defending team will be penalised, for example, for bringing down or collapsing a rolling maul. However, if an attacking player is caught on his feet in a tackle in a normal maul and is being held by one or more opponents, he tries desperately to go to ground and often collapses the maul in an attempt to do so. This is not penalised. So the laws allow an attacking team to collapse, but not a team defending. In Super Rugby, Fainga starred during the Super Rugby season. This is the 2019 season for the Brumbies, because of their almost unstoppable rolling maul, and they paved the way for him to equal Malcolm Marx's. Also, remember, he's the number 2 of the hooker for the Lions. His record in the 2018 also was 12 tries. Fainga was the highest try scorer in the Australian Conference. So the top try scorers in 2 consecutive years of Super Rugby were the hookers. In rolling mauls, 90% of penalties are awarded against the defending team. Let's have a look at a rolling maul in a bit of detail. The definition of a maul, first of all, it says that a maul consists of a ball carrier and at least one player from each team bound together and on their feet. Directly from the World Rugby Book of Laws, a line-out ends when a ruck or maul forms and all the feet of all the players in the ruck or more move beyond the mark of touch. Now, the mark of touch was that line through the centre of the line-out before the rolling maul started. It also goes on, 1835, players not participating in the line-out must remain at least 10 metres from the mark of touch on their own team's side or behind the goal line if this is nearer. So until the line-out is over, players cannot join the line. So that's players from either both the defending team and the attacking team. Law 16.6, players who leave a maul must immediately retire behind the offside line, and these players may rejoin the maul. That refers mainly to players from the defending team peeling off to get in a better position to defend the rolling maul. 16.7b, players joining a maul must bind on to the hindmost player in the maul. Now that refers precisely to the attacking team. A player wanting to join that maul to assist with the drive. Remember, he must wait until the maul, till the line-out is over, till the last man's feet in that maul goes over the mark of touch before he joins. Well, that's what it says, and if he does join before that, it's a penalty. And 99.3, say a player must not intentionally prevent an opponent from tackling or attempting to tackle a ball carrier, because that, of course, is a case of obstruction. Let's go back to the maul that we started looking at before.
Really well set.
Right, and looking at it again, okay, the maul has been formed. So the line out is nowhere near over because it hasn't driven so that the last man's feet passes the line of touch. And yet, look, almost straight away, number 12, number 10, they've all come in from the Brumbies, so that's a penalty. So straight away, and admittedly, I suppose here you could say the Chiefs players have also could have been penalised for doing the same, but they're doing so in response to the Brumbies now, the Brumbies players getting momentum of their rolling maul and them trying to prevent it. So the first infringement was against the Brumbies. When you look at where number 12 joined, watch where number 12 joins this rolling maul. Watch, 12 comes in, Finger is number 2, he has possession, but 12 joins in front of Finger. So he's in front of the last player in the maul. So he also now, from 9.3, could also have been penalised. Let's go even further. Now, there's a sort of a mini maul that breaks away from the original maul. Now, one could argue here it's still the same maul and some players have peeled off. Or you could say, no, it's not the same maul, it's a secondary maul that's formed. Well, either way, I don't really care. But the point is, let's have a look now at finger number 2 at the back of this rolling maul. Now there's a third breakaway, but now this pod that breaks away here, there is no Chiefs player. Watch here, go back. As here we are. There is no Chiefs player in contact with that pod that breaks off. So this is a case of obstruction. The player in front of Fainga has obstructed the Chiefs defender, and again that try should have been disallowed. So in that rolling maul, there was a case where the attacking team could have been penalised on 3 occasions, and yet 90% of penalties awarded in rolling mauls are against the defending team. I doubt whether there's anybody, not only in Australian rugby and world rugby, that understands the game and understands the laws better than Dick Marks. And this is a comment made by Dick. Size and strength are part of an attacking armoury, but what we saw in the 2019 Rugby World Cup quarter-final between South Africa and Japan was not an edifying sight. The Springbok maul advanced nearly 50 metres up the field, and the smaller Japanese pack had no legal defence for it. The essence of rugby attack is carrying, running and kicking, not pushing. Initial forward movement to provide a going forward platform is good, but rugby using pushing power as a weapon for gaining ground or forcing a penalty is not what rugby is all about.
Mark the marks. He's the driver at the back, with the men in front just keep.
Now, this is the particular maul that Dick was referring to. We've only picked it up here as it approaches the try line, but in fact it had come from about the 10-metre line.
Body weight, he breaks. Brilliant timing from Marks. He's had a massive impact on this.
And once again, you couldn't get a more obvious situation for a penalty to be awarded against the attacking team. From the original maul, have a look. There is now this breakaway pod. There is no Japanese player anywhere near this breakaway pod. So in behind there, look, that's an obvious case of obstruction. Marks breaks away and makes the pass to his scrum half, who then scores the try.
Over the top, he's under the sticks.
It's a classic example of obvious obstruction being allowed, resulting in a 7-point try to the box at a very critical time of that Rugby World Cup against Japan. This is an obstruction and should have resulted in a penalty to Japan, of course.
The driving maul, can they set something up?
Let's have a look at another couple of examples here, and you be the judge of whether the team performing the rolling maul, whether the players should have been penalised.
Bit of momentum now as they edge towards the 5-metre line for Alpha. Anger is over! 12 tries last year, and he's got one in week 1 in 2020.
4 or 5 metres. Nice clean take. You can see the momentum going against the Brumbies, but they stayed tight. The arms are all linked, the body height they try to drop, and they go through all those red defenders, and there's the space out wide.
James Slipper was the one in front. And Falau Fainga gets his first try of 2020.
He has it at the back, over the halfway they go. Same ball. And now they turn the advantage. Alright, Simone taken to ground, so penalty to the Brumbies.
Now, this penalty was given against Scott Young from coming into the side of the maul. At this stage there, that is not a maul. The breakaway pod, there is no Reds player in contact with that. And number 6, Scott Young, had every right to come in from the side, or in fact every right to tackle the ball player at the back of that breakaway pod.
Same ball. And now they turn the advantage.
Now, Ian Smith's analysis of 250 games through the 2014-15 Super Rugby competition resulted in the following statistics and observations. Of the 107 maul infringements, 48 were for collapsing the maul, 57 for side entry by the opposition, and only 2 against the attacking team for a truck and trailer situation. Very few penalties were awarded against the team in possession of the ball for maul offences after the maul had been formed. This is despite the frequent, obvious separation of the ball carrier's shoulder within his team, something we didn't even look at this stage, and a significant number of instances when players from the team in possession rejoined the maul in front of the ball carrier. Well, we've looked at a couple of others, but there's still one to come. The only penalties against the team in possession were given on rare occasions for obstruction, when the maul was being formed, usually from a line-out, as in the case of a rolling maul. The laws of rugby union definition states, we've looked at that before. In many instances, the holding by players of a team defending the maul took place after the binding of the ball carrier by his teammates, and frequently at no stage was the actual ball carrier held by an opponent. There are many inconsistencies in the laws of the game of rugby, and many that are not enforced consistently. The maul is being refereed using a very loose interpretation of existing laws, and to the great advantage of the team in possession. In 2015 competition in particular, it was uninspiring to watch, with few memorable games and periods of exhilarating play disappointingly less prominent. The match between the Reds and the Jaguars with Jaguares in the early stages of the 2020 championships provided a classic example of the failure of match officials to look for and recognise infringements by the attacking team in rolling mauls, the obvious unfairness of many of the game's laws, and referees' decisions influencing and often deciding the outcomes of games. Let's now look at a clip of this game, and at this stage the Reds notice a leading Jaguares 14-0.
Go to the corner again. Jaguares so...
The law book says that the maul must be formed so that the opposition can contest the maul at its formation. This includes the formation of a maul at the line-out. The example here is taken from the official World Rugby Law Book, or one of the examples of obstruction by the lifters at the line-out, in which case the penalty in the here should have gone to the red team. This is exactly what's happened here with the Jaguares lifters.
This is their game. They absolutely love it.
Notice also, but number 9, the halfback, was not part of the line-out. He was back 10 with the defence line, and number 6 was the acting halfback. But as soon as this maul was formed, 9, of course, has come forward offside and joined the maul. Or at least in an offside position.
Montoya in possession. Just inching their way up the field. Now the cavalry arrives from the back line as well.
The rest of them all, in fact, is quite legitimate.
They're doing a good job, the Reds here, but they're going to lose this battle if they don't put the numbers in.
And Montoya
Kick it at the corner, and this is exactly the thing that the Reds need to be careful of. Can't afford to give away a couple of soft tackles, soft penalties. And again, if that's what the high tackles for.
Okay, thanks. Tomas Kubeli is on the field.
And once again, the lifters are obstructing and should have been penalised.
All the Jaguares.
Again, 3, 7 and 14. not in the line out, have joined illegally.
They set up the maul. Bruni in possession. They get a roll on the Jaguares. This is a fast start for the home.
And now we see the original maul splits into a new legitimate maul, but the players on the Reds goal line are obstructing the ball carrier, or obstructing the defenders rather, from tackling the ball carrier. The Reds led 24-12 at half time. At the end of the game, the penalty count was 13-3 against the Reds. 10 of the penalties to the home team gave them the option of a penalty goal attempt or a kick to the corner. The latter was chosen on 9 occasions, and 4 of these resulted in a rolling maul try or tries and 26 points.
Life is over it, but they're over the line. The Jaguares and Montoya score. Lucas Polos playing penalty advantage now for the Jaguares. Will come back for the penalty. Wow. 8-1 penalty count at the moment. Lucas Polos.
Tupou was called by the assistant referee as being offside. He possibly is, very marginal, but he might have 1 foot offside. But the thing is, throughout this game, there were numerous occasions where there were players metres offside and not called.
Here comes the red shove. But
what would have been your decision? I think 9 referees out of 10 here would have given the penalty to the Reds.
Wasn't pushing straight. So penalty, the Jaguares off the hook.
Interesting comment to follow by Rod Kafer.
Oh, dear.
Never go forward.
Let's see Tupou just angling around slightly.
No, I don't think so,
You don't think so?
I think he was pushing as straight as you possibly can.
Ball. Carreras again with the standing start.
This tackle was judged to be a high tackle. It was around the shoulders, but certainly not around the neck and certainly not dangerous. It was an excellent cover defence tackle, and the referee should have allowed the play to continue.
Now they have penalty advantage for a high shot on Carreras.
Every time that we are here in the second half, we have a penalty, so you need better discipline, otherwise someone is going to the bin.
That looks like a final warning.
5 metre line out.
They've scored twice from the rolling maul so far.
Once again, the Jaguares are guilty of obstruction here and should have been penalised. And again, players joining the maul from an offside position. The Jaguares should have been penalised.
They set up the maul. Montoya has it in control at the back. And the backs join in this time. Right, in there digging. And it pops out for the Queensland Reds. Liam Wright with his hands all over it. Still there for the Jaguares. Penalty. And this time...
I'm quite sure that Liam had every right to argue this decision also.
Liam Wright, the captain, in the bin for 10 minutes. That is not going to help their cause. 11-2, the penalty count. It's there for the Jaguares.
Well, they're consistent at least. Obstruction by the lifters once again, and also players offside joining the maul.
Going straight across field. Montoya is in behind though. That's 3 for the Jaguares captain.
Well, there couldn't be more opportunities to penalise the Jaguares. Once again, here's an obvious case of obstruction.
It's excellent play from the Jaguares. It's a strength of theirs, of course.
Miotti strikes it beautifully.
Is rugby a simple game? Well, not really. In rugby, there are 199 infringements. And of those 199 infringements, 149 of them, the sanction is a full penalty. Now, referees can't be blamed for penalising infringements, and players cannot be blamed for kicking goals when given the opportunity. We all remember well the decision given against Karevi in the Rugby World Cup match against Wales, where he was penalised for dangerous play. So another one of those decisions that was highly debatable. And of course, it resulted in a penalty, which was 3 points to the Welsh team. And the benefit arising from a single skill exercised by a single player, while all others become spectators, we're referring to goal kicking now, of course, not only fractures the flow of the game, but is also incongruous in a game based on teamwork that markets itself as a running game. The problem simply is, of the nearly 200 infringements that are possible in the game of rugby, 150 of them, basically, the sanction for which is a penalty. And because, as we've said before, 60% of all penalties are given in the opposition's half, then there's going to be either penalty goals or kicks to the corner and rolling mauls. Dickie Marks makes the comment, mysterious sanctions currently confuse even expert commentators. A law unrelated to the principles and object of the game is only cluttering up the law book. Up to a point, the fewer we have, the better off we are for all participants. If we look now at where a lot of these infringements occur, we see here that there are 54 occur at tackle, ruck and maul, and 91 at line out and scrum. 145 infringements at scrum, line out and ruck, maul, tackle, which is basically where contests for the possession occur. Well, what about the rest of the game doing something after the contest has been won? Well, there's only 44 for everything else. The laws and referee decisions. The majority of infringements occur during a rugby match at the breakdown, where fine judgments of timing and positioning by players at the breakdown are sometimes perceived differently by the referee. Let's look at this Super Rugby match in 2020 between the Reds and the Brumbies.
This team, we need to communicate a little bit better than that.
Liam White was complaining that there was no clear...
Just stop it there for a moment. Remember, look, there are 18 possible infringements at the breakdown, of which 15 mandate a penalty, and penalties at the breakdown account for more than 40% of all penalties awarded. Now, the penalty here was given against Liam Wright for not releasing the ball. It's a nightmare for referees as well as the players. If we go back and have a look at this now, here Liam Wright gets the ball, gets to his feet, but he's now effectively tackled by a Brumbies player. Now, on the ground, at no time does the Brumbies player allow Liam Wright his right to release the ball. Sure, he has to release the ball straight away, but he's being held by the ball is being held in by the Brumbies player, and he can't release the ball. So in this case, the penalty should have been against the Brumbies for not allowing the tackle player, to release the ball. You can see now the Brumbies players appealing for a penalty, and of course Liam Wright looks at the referee as he gets up and says, "Now, what on earth was that for? He wouldn't let me release the ball." As we've seen, there are so many possible infringements at the breakdown, and so many that regularly occur. It would appear to spectators and players, for that matter, that referees who have an incredibly difficult job sometimes ignore certain infringements and quite often penalise incorrectly. Referees' decisions and their impact on a game. The forwards pass in both rugby union and rugby league is one of the most misunderstood laws, and it's misunderstood by nearly all spectators as well as most players and referees. Now, some of you watching this presentation will be aware of my background and aware of the fact that over the years I've produced a number of videos now for both the rugby union and the rugby league to try to explain exactly what is and what isn't a forward pass. But it appears there still is quite a poor understanding of what it is that constitutes a forward pass.
He was rocked with that shot. Now over to Pearce, sets it to it, but we're heading back. And it's another try. Ball back this time round. Forward passes a call to Abe Beale, and looks up and says, "Hey."
I don't think Willie LaRue needed to throw the miss pass, and they're doing some brilliant work. But again, just a floating pass.
Puts it in. shot coming from the Reds, and it comes back for the scrum half. Spade, Stewart, inside it goes to James O'Connor, but no try.
And the tap off went forward, the tip on went forward.
In neither case there was the pass a forward pass. For those interested, at the end of this presentation, there will be another short video where once again I try to explain exactly what is and what isn't a forward pass in accordance with the laws of rugby. Is rugby a simple game? Well, certainly not. Is it a fair game? Not always. Here's a game between the Sharks and the Stormers held early in 2020. It's at the start of this little clip. The Sharks were given a full penalty short of halfway for a dubious infringement at the breakdown. And at this stage of the game, as you'll see, the Stormers are leading 14-13, and Bosch puts over a magnificent goal kick for 3 points, basically from halfway. South African goal kickers, as I keep saying, are the finest in the world, and it gets a bit boring after a while watching them slotting goals.
And that is going to come over.
Now, following a Sharks mistake a little later, the Stormers have the scrum feed and in fairness deserve possession and not to have to run the risk of a penalty within kicking distance. This is one of the unfair things about the game's laws. I mean, it's a situation where the Sharks made the mistake, the Stormers have the scrum feed, and you would think, therefore, in fairness, they deserve possession. But let's see what happens. Now, even from that scrum, I guarantee if that was shown to a number of referees before the decision was shown, it would have been 50-50. Probably would have favour given the penalty in this case here to the Stormers, not the Sharks. However,
of Craig Burton there.
And Bosch once again, from a long way out, doesn't make any mistake.
He's got it.
Now we have another scrum, and in this case it would appear the Stormers are definitely in control. But what happens? Now, here we are, like even if up to this point the referee has penalised somebody from every scrum that looks a lot like that. But in this case, he chooses not to and allows play to continue. Let's see what happens.
Ball is out.
And that's what could be over. That should seal the game for the Sharks. The players are celebrating around, but turnover ball from the scrum.
So in the last few minutes of that game, the Stormers went from 14-13 up to being beaten quite convincingly. What was the final score there we saw? 24-14 by the Sharks. The line-out is a genuine contest for possession with great advantage to the team throwing in and a little or no risk of being penalised. But the scrum, no real contest for possession as far as striking the ball, but with a statistically too high a risk of a team with the loose head being penalised, as we've just seen in that little video. Now, we've had a pretty thorough look at the many of the problems that are associated with the 15-a-side game, but rugby, like cricket, has other products. 10s and 7s, with 7s being by far the most widely played and watched. Global numbers of rugby players are greatly enhanced by those being attracted to the 7s format, particularly females. Now, the average sports enthusiast, without a long history or no history, in fact, of rugby, would rather watch 7s and 15s, and why? In the time it takes for one game of rugby, one can watch at least 4 games of 7s. A day at the HSBC 7s can involve as many as 16 matches on a single field and feature many different natures, some never seen outside the Rugby World Cup. But most importantly, the things that are turning people off 15-a-side, generally speaking, are not even seen in the 7s. No rolling mauls, no collapsed scrums, little or no time wasting, fewer breakdowns, clearer referee decisions at the breakdown, fewer penalty goals, numerous multi-pass plays, speed of play, and a non-stop display of individual skills. They're the sorts of things that literally make 7s rugby totally different to 15-side rugby. I mentioned earlier the HSBC finals match played in Vancouver earlier this year between New Zealand and Australia. Let's look for a moment and compare statistics from that sevens final and the Rugby World Cup in 2019. Now, the attack ratio, the final only, the attack ratio for the Rugby World Cup in the final was 244. For the VC Sevens final, that was 6,400. Remember, that meant that they passed the ball 64 times more than they kicked it. Passes per attack, final only, was 1.22 in the Rugby World Cup final. The average was 1.4. Well, in the VC Sevens, the final, Australia actually was 3.8. But the average for the game was 3.1 passes per attack. Remember, the average passes per attack in all rugby matches analysed was 1.4. Tries, the points from tries compared to total points, the ratio. Now, this is all finals now. It was 47%, less than half. For the sevens, 83%, nearly twice as much. The breakdown possessions to total possessions, all finals, was 84%. Massive number of breakdowns. In the sevens, 39%, virtually less than half as many. The last little ratio there, or the last statistic, is one we haven't used so far. But what it is the minutes it takes for a try to be scored. On average, the minutes taken for a try to be scored. Now, in all the finals in Rugby World Cup 2019, one had to wait 21 minutes for a try to be scored. In the sevens, the wait was 4 minutes. Now, changing or amending rugby laws will always be difficult. At professional level, there is no doubt that the scrum and rolling maul have become a dominating feature of the game, and from an average spectator's perspective, this is to the game's detriment. However, even before there is any hope of making changes to the laws pertaining to these aspects of the game, there must be a willingness to make a change. If the game's administrators are unable to see the problems, suggestions and solutions must first come from players and coaches. However, there is a problem here. The majority of players in any rugby team, 8 out of 15, are forwards, most of whom it would seem love scrums and rolling mauls. Another problem also relates to numbers. The great majority of coaches and captains of professional rugby teams have been forwards in their respective playing careers and either cannot recognise the problem or simply do not see a need for change. To illustrate this, 15 of the 20, 75% of head coaches of the 2019 Rugby World Cup teams were forwards, as were 13 of the 20, 65% captains. Now, an analysis of provincial and even club level teams in Australia leads to a similar pattern. I always hesitate to mention rugby league, but numbers in rugby league, which has been professional 3 times longer than rugby union, are the opposite. In 2020, 27% of NRL coaches and 20% of captains played as forwards. Now, much can be learnt from this code, but a high degree of snobbishness and bias do stand as major obstacles. In March 2020, following the Rugby World Cup and at the start of the new law review cycle 2019 to 23, the Rugby Committee and Law Review Group got together, a specialist breakdown group, to discuss the laws at the breakdown and the problems referees were having with these laws, and there were numerous. This group met via teleconference in September 2019 and then face-to-face in March 2020. And their conclusions were the following. The group agreed that there was no need for new laws or law change, rather a refocus on existing law, and law application guidelines were then issued to inform the rugby community of the findings of the group. These were the participants involved in that committee. Have a look. If you look through them all there, you fail to see an Australian representative. In fact, there were no representatives from Australia, France, Italy, Argentina, nor any country other than Tier 1 nations. Rugby in Australia. The product must be better for our code to survive in our country. Those in charge of the game must have the courage and the will to make law changes and amendments that are necessary to return to the principles embodied in the game's charter and to grow the code, ensuring its survival. A simple return to the past is not the answer, but a good start would be to look carefully at and amend or delete laws that have shown to have unintended consequences that are a detriment to our game.